attend the class.
MashaAllah alayha, very proud, MashaAllah, even though, on there in the airport, but in probably on a flight or something, but listening to the lectures, MashaAllah, that is commitment. Very, very proud of those that are committed to learning their Islam despite the hardship of maybe travel or all of that. MashaAllah, I'm so proud. Okay, here we go. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So we are still, let's look into what we were doing. We're still in the chapter of Ahkam al-Janaiz, in the different rulings related to funeral. We were talking about chaplaincy. We were talking about the different medications that one can be using. We talked about haram medications. We talked about halal medications. We talked about straight drugs in case that, or in the event of, sometimes that's probably the only thing that's working for that person. So we talked about that. We also talked about chaplaincy and, some details in regards to chaplaincy. We also talked about complaining or even seeing, let's say, specialists. Or, by the way, it is important to mention that in terms of seeking treatment, I forgot to mention that one. In terms of are we obligated to seek treatment or not? Believe it or not, scholars actually debated this one. I'm just going to make the story short. Scholars debated whether you are obligated to seek treatment or not. The first opinion said that you are obligated to seek treatment because they regarded that just as you're obligated to preserve your body, then ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. Let me write that rule down and just comment on that one. ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. So what does that mean? So if something is obligatory to do, then whatever leads to that obligation becomes an obligation itself. In other words, the ruling to the means to being committed or fulfilling that obligation, okay, it becomes obligatory itself, because if that's the only way to do it, then it becomes obligatory. So the scholars, debated on whether it is obligatory to seek treatment. So the first opinion said, well, since it's obligatory to preserve your body, and that's a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have to seek treatment. And therefore, to fulfill the other obligations, then you would have to do whatever is necessary to make you strong and fit to be capable to fulfill the different responsibilities or the different obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked you to fulfill. That was the first opinion. The second opinion considered that no, you are not obligated to seek treatment, because in general, seeking treatment is mubah. They considered that it is permissible and not necessarily obligatory. They said that seeking the treatment or etc. is something that you can decide to do, and to be patient on pain or to be patient in the struggle is actually better. I find that really ironic, because if one is going through a hardship, why ask them to continue and prolong the hardship if one is capable of maybe removing the hardship, and instead of probably regressing and getting worse and then probably leading to death? And of course, like I said, it's important to just know the differences of opinion. Some scholars regarded that, hey, the second opinion, they said it's a sin remover, and being patient on pain is basically something that one is supposed to endure rather than rush in removing and uplifting the pain, and that way they can be they can get the deed of having their sins removed. I really find that interpretation rather odd, because definitely investing with a good health and being able to fulfill the responsibilities is definitely preponderant and is definitely better than actually needing, perhaps down the road, of other people's assistance. You know, the most important thing about getting treatment is not needing other people's assistance down the road. Because the worst thing in illnesses is not enduring the pain, but is actually losing one's honor, needing to use the bathroom and needing other people to assist you. And even in your private moments, you're not capable of, doing the necessary things that are needed for your own hygiene or whatever it is, and comfort. That in itself is actually worse than the pain itself. And certainly when the pain or even the illness goes worse, and you probably decided that you wanted to get treatment, perhaps it had become so bad in a very critical situation that even the most professional doctors might actually tell you that it was too late for them to reverse all the downhill that this person went into. So, and certainly in the early stages, it's probably way easier to cure than in the late stages. And the Prophet ﷺ himself actually seek treatment. He went for cupping because that was what was known during his time. He went for ruqya as well, as to treat the different the different sihr, the different black magic that he had faced. We also talked about in details about complaining, and basically, let's call it pastoral therapy and chaplaincy. We talked about that. So we went in details with that one, but I'm not going to, repeat everything that I had said. Okay, let's see. It is a sunnah. Let's look at this one. It is a sunnah that a person would make a will. It's a sunnah that a person would make a will. So what does that mean? That a person would make a will. So when we're speaking about will, we're actually talking about if a person had money or if a person didn't have money. Money doesn't necessarily mean in cash, but it can include property. It can include different things that are under their responsibility. And then they would want others to take over that responsibility. And basically, it's just more of their commitment. Now, it is a sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ had actually said in the hadith, ما حق امرئ مسلم له شيء يوصي به يبيت ليلتين إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده. The Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in the hadith that it is not permissible. Oh, hold on. Let's say, let me just make sure that you are able to see the hadith that we're doing. Hold on, let me see. Let me just make sure that, oh dear. Thought I had the right page open, but okay. Okay, here we go. This is it. Okay, here, this is it. It is not permissible for any Muslim who has something to declare in testimony to stay for 2 nights without having his last will written and kept ready for him. Well, the translation is actually a poor translation, but I'm going to explain it. Okay, so it's not permissible for any Muslim who has something to declare. Okay, now here's the thing. Is the word in Arabic, or at least is the hadith in Arabic really saying that? In Arabic, it says that it is not permissible for a Muslim that they له شيء يوصي به, that some scholars actually interpreted that that's not meaning that they have something to declare. Other interpretations said that no, it's not that they have something to declare, but it's that any Muslim that wants to sleep, that they should have something to declare. Okay, that they should have something to declare, and that they would basically have their own will written and basically next to them. So underneath their pillow or next to them. So what's the difference between the two interpretations? The difference is the first one regarded that you would make a will only if you actually had something to declare, property, maybe a certain responsibility, maybe some debt that you owe, maybe a witness that you wanted to declare, maybe, something important that would mean something to the other people's lives, that, or even something that is important to you. Maybe you owed something to some people and you wanted the inheritors, your family, to make sure that you, once you die, that you would give, I don't know, the $500 that you owed Ibrahim, for example, and you wanted to make sure that your family recognizes that that loan that you had made, and you wanted to pay it back, for example. Or perhaps you had a lot of money and you wanted to make a will to donate to, I don't know, Gems of Light, or probably a Muslim school or a masjid, or maybe people in Syria or Lebanon or whatever it is, and wanted to donate for those people. Then in that situation, you can write a will. But the second interpretation regarded that no, it's not that someone who has something to declare, but it's actually one must declare a will. Wait, why must they declare a will? They regarded that this is more of a type of maw'idha, a type of a good reminder. In other words, it's more of a spiritual discipline, and therefore letting the Muslim recognize that, hey, you see this moment that you're going to be putting yourself to sleep in. I want you to recognize that it's exactly the way that you will be putting yourself to death one day, and this could be your last breath, this could be your last minute, and therefore make that will. Even if you were to write something like, I want you to have taqwa, I want you to remember akhirah, I want you to do what is best for your akhirah, just anything, or I want you to memorize the Quran, just declare anything. So they regarded that this isn't necessarily just if you wanted to make a will in regards to a certain property or loan or whatever, but they considered that that's a must for every Muslim. Then they went into differences of opinions on whether it is obligatory to make a will, or whether it's a sunnah or a sunnah mu'akkada, whether it's a highly recommended sunnah act, or whether it's a sunnah meaning just recommended. So why did they actually have differences of opinions on whether I have to make a will or not? Well, because the Prophet ﷺ had said, ma haq. This is, when you say ma haq, it's like saying, well, this is not permissible, and therefore it is obligatory, it is a responsibility upon every Muslim that they would have to make a will. Okay. So the scholars then debated, is this obligatory on those that have a certain responsibility that they would make this, or is this that no, you have to make a will just because you have to make a will even if you didn't actually have something to declare, and therefore considered that it is obligatory upon every Muslim. So they said right there, every Muslim, and it didn't necessarily make it exclusive upon a group of Muslims. So that's a second opinion. They considered that every Muslim is obligated to do that and write a will, even if we're speaking about reminding others of faith. Okay. And here's the thing, is that different opinions between scholars, because you could see right here, yabitu laylatain, is this necessarily talking about 2 nights sleeping throughout 2 nights and not having a will, or is this not necessarily exclusive to 2 nights, but this is talking about a certain amount of time passing, and that they would have to have some wasiyah. But here's one thing. When we're speaking about wills, it's important to remember that for the legal process, especially in a place like America, we cannot just consider that, yes, I have a will, and yes, I found this will underneath my son's pillow or whatever it is, and here's what I would like to apply. That is not a legal document that would pass. So you would have to notarize that will, and therefore you would basically have to make sure that this becomes a legal document, and therefore ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. And this is important, especially for those living in the US, for example. I don't know about other countries, but let's say somebody had some money or some children or or probably things in their name. Their inheritors might actually lose all that money, and the bank or probably the government might actually take over that money and consider that, well, you don't have right over that money since you don't have a written will or basically a document to prove that this deceased person is basically passing it on to you. So making those wills are extremely important, especially right now. You would have basically ChatGPT, and it's really easy. The other day I made the will and it was actually online. I think it costed me like $20. So not too bad. You could ask ChatGPT, write me a template for a will where I'm let's say assigning X or Y or Z for to being responsible for the money to distribute it in the Sharia way or whatever it is. And then you're basically going online in a Zoom conversation with basically this area that is making a valid notary for your will. So it's really not hard, and you can have that template. Just make sure you have, if we're talking about a large amount of money, just make sure you have, I guess, a legal specialist go over the will and make sure that it is actually valid and that it is within your area. It is something that is complete and but basically be valid for your circumstances, for the state that you're in, and so forth. Okay, so when we're speaking about wills, it's important to remember that the will, there are two different paths here. There is a will that the Islamic will, you cannot actually make a will for more than 1/3 of your money. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the Islamic will does not actually go through someone that inherits. Okay, so what does that mean? Meaning that the money, if I want to make a will, donate, for example, etc., it has two conditions. One, it must not exceed 1/3 of the money left behind. Two, it must not be for inheritor. So what does that look like? Let's say I had $100,000, okay? I had this amount, let's just assume, okay? I cannot make a will for over 1/3 of that money because we're actually not supposed to be abusing our inheritors. That's number one. Number two, I cannot make a will for my son, my daughter, my husband, etc., my family, unless this person is not inheriting. So if this person is not an inheritor, then I can make a will for them. Okay, if they're not part of the inheritors. But if this person is an inheritor, I cannot make a will for them, and they would also get perhaps the inheritance when it would be distributed on them. But when you want to make a legal will, if you make a legal will, this does not mean Islamically you would have the right to take the money. But this is the process to go through legally, but Islamically. Let's just say I made a will that my husband would take over the money. Okay, let's just assume I made a will that my husband would take over the money, but he knows that I made the will, but on a condition. You recognize that I made this will, but this doesn't mean that you take the money. It just means I'm making you be the person responsible to distribute this in the Sharia ways, in meaning the laws of inheritance. Okay, then in that situation, this would be basically permissible, but he would have to understand that Islamically, he would not take the money and say, well, I've got the paper, here it is. The will basically says it's just all for me. And in that situation, that would be haram. This would be taking money that does not belong to you. Okay, Islamically, you cannot have a will for an inheritor anyways, but we're doing this legally in that way because that's the only way that in the legal form that we can do it in, and it must be given to one particular person, so that person becomes responsible in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to distribute the will as assigned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here's one thing. We got to remember that before even giving the will, there must be a couple things that we need to do before even making the will. Number one, before even distributing the will, we have to make sure that we give the money that we owe to the person that basically to the money that basically this money belongs to. So whether we're speaking about debt, we have to make sure that that person comes in and says, well, here's my document. Does it have to be a document? Well, we can also have, yes, witnesses or other witnesses say, well, here's the, yes, I witnessed that X owed $5,000 to this deceased person, or, well, this deceased person owes that person. Okay, it's the other way around. Okay, and here's my witness for this. Then in that situation, we would say before you even distribute any money on the inheritors and before you even pass out any will, you would have to come in and basically pay first whatever this person owes, and we're going to deduct that from the money they left behind. So number one is so number one is basically the amount of money that they probably owe. Before even that, we would use his money to probably cover the funeral cost. What funeral cost are we talking about? Are we talking about the food to feed the people coming in? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What are we talking about in terms of funeral cost? We're talking about shroud, burial, and washing the dead. This is what we're talking about. In America, if it's a Muslim cemetery, unfortunately, sometimes they're making money out of that. They might actually cost you almost $6,000 versus in a non-Muslim cemetery, it might actually cost you $1,300, $1,200. Okay, so unfortunately, some Muslims are actually making this into a business. Okay, and that's quite sad. And just keeping that one in mind. Okay, what if we don't have a Muslim cemetery? So if we don't have a Muslim cemetery, then you could actually request that it would be on the side, if there's no Muslim cemetery, meaning on the side of that cemetery, meaning try to request from that cemetery to make a Muslim area on the side away from the others. And usually, for them, they are capable of doing that. Okay. Let's say, while the person is dying, okay, the Prophet ﷺ had actually بس يا ماما. The Prophet ﷺ had basically taught us that we should be reminding this person that is dying to have good thoughts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean to have good thoughts, to have good expectations? Like what? That they're going to be forgiven, they're going to enter Jannah for a good deed that they had, whatever good deed that they had committed. So basically making them have good expectations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and die basically on good thoughts and have these good expectations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana inda dhanni abdi bi." It's exactly right there. I am just as my servant thinks of me. I'm able to do for him what he thinks I can do for him. So to forgive him, perhaps, maybe to grant him Jannah, even though he had committed a lot of sin, etc. The other thing is that it is a sunnah. It is a sunnah to feed to feed the person if, of course, they're capable of eating. But here's one thing: when you are in funeral homes or in palliative care, they will tell you that not to feed, or of course they're not going to be capable of eating, but to give them sips of water. They'll tell you don't give them sips of water, and many times they will tell you that it's because it basically starts leaking in their abdomen, or at least they'll start urinating it, or it will just get stuck in their body, etc. And sometimes they're trying to accelerate the death process. They would tell you that it's better for them, etc. But that's not the sunnah. The sunnah is to make the person as comfortable as possible in the dying process. So the sunnah, while the person is dying, is to give them sips of water. But here's the thing: when you're giving them sips of water, okay, they're usually, at that moment, their body is doing all these different secretions, and you could hear that sound of secretions really loud. So there's at one point they are capable of pressing on their jaw to get the moist out, maybe like a cotton, kind of like a cotton. It looks like like a lollipop, and there's a cotton at the end, okay, and or kind of like a sponge at the end. And or if you don't have that, you can always get like a cloth and put some water in it, or basically, damp it with water and basically just squeeze the water inside the dying person's mouth, just because they would be extremely thirsty. So you're giving them some hydration, and the hydration is not to prolong their life, but is to make their death as peaceful as possible. It's not prolonging their life. They're dying anyways. There's no doubt about that. At one point, all the amount of moisture that you're going to be putting in their mouth is just going to come out right away. You're putting in that water, but the secretions are so much that there's no water really going inside. You're just moisturizing their mouth. So in that situation, you can stop from moisturizing their mouth, because all that's happening is really that their body is just literally spitting it out. There's nothing going inside. The secretions are just coming out of their mouth, and they're just losing all those fluids in their body. So in the end, is that while the person is dying, it's the sunnah to always remind them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly at that moment, you want to avoid reminding them of fear. At that point, this is not the time to make them be fearful of Allah. They already have that. This is the time to make them be hopeful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. During a person, maybe we're living our life, that's when we want to remind people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be fearful. But while the person is dying, we want them to be hopeful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they only made just one good deed. Tell them you had done a lot of good things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will forgive you all your sins, etc. All of that. And certainly to keep away all the different loss of hope at that moment. Okay. And if the person is near death, when is that point? When does that mark? Usually when the person is dying, you would have to look at their body. Okay. What I mean by looking at their body, when the person is, the dying person, certainly the doctors might tell you that there's no hope for this person's cure. Their prognosis is 3 months, 2 months, whatever it is that they're expected to live for. Could be longer, could be shorter. At the end, their expectations of how long the organs will function. But when you look at the person's body, usually the feelings within their feet, that's when they start losing sensation in their feet, and you could see then the feet basically going outwards, so going as if you're pressing on a pedal. Sometimes they'll just not necessarily be looking as if you're pressing on a pedal. Most of the times it would be in those late stages, as if you're pressing on a pedal, is when they start having low oxygen. That's when their body basically starts, twitching, or their body might actually harden as if they're pressing on a pedal. But sometimes it would just basically lose power. So it would start from their toes, then go up their feet, then probably go up to their knees. That's when, at that moment, once they're starting to lose sensation in their feet, etc., that's when you want to remind a person to say La ilaha illallah. And the reason for that is there's going to be a point once their ruh, okay, why are they losing sensation that way? Because the soul departs the body from the feet, and then it starts gradually going up. So the soul departs the body from the feet, and then it starts thinking of, imagine that that the soul basically departs the body going up, and from the feet basically to the abdomen, to basically the head, and then of course finally the soul leaving the body. Okay, so that's why when the body is starting to lose sensation from the feet, you want to recognize that it is getting closer and closer to the abdomen. And once it gets closer to the abdomen, and then therefore the lungs, it becomes extremely hard, in fact, probably impossible for the person to have the ability to say La ilaha illallah. Why? Because they won't have the breath to do it. Their capacity right now is not the same as it used to be. So it became extremely hard. So you want them to say La ilaha illallah before they start losing their power and their ability to say it. So don't necessarily wait till it gets to the knees, but because they'll have episodes of waking up and sleeping or dozing off. They'll have episodes, they're awake, they're talking to you, saying a few words. Maybe you can barely hear them unless you probably put your ears next to their lips to hear them say something that is important to them or whatever. And you could barely hear them. You could, barely say anything. You just want to, of course, keep away those that they dislike. That right now is not the time for asking forgiveness. Too late for those that want to come in and ask for forgiveness. Definitely too late. You should have come and done that before. Right now, We are just concerned that this person is resting in peace. Okay. So in that situation, we just want the people that this deceased person or this dying person is comfortable with having around. So in that situation, all you're doing is La ilaha illallah. It is something that the Prophet ﷺ had also recommended. He said, "Laqinu mawtakum la ilaha illallah." Exhort the dying among you to say there's la ilaha illallah. There's no deity worthy of worship but Allah. So are we going to do that? Are we going to tell them, say la ilaha illallah, say la ilaha illallah? No, you don't want to do that. You want to basically provoke them by you yourself saying la ilaha illallah. Sometimes, and I have done that, when somebody is dying, to encourage them to say, right now, I want you to say it. This is the moment you say La ilaha illallah. You're dying anyways. This is the moment that when you say La ilaha illallah, you're going to Jannah, and this will guarantee you a place in Jannah. I've done that before to, depends on the person's psychology. I've done that before to some people and actually said, me knowing their psychology, that they needed that encouragement. I would say, I want you to say it. This is now the point. This is that moment that you say La ilaha illallah. I want you to put all your effort and actually say it. I have done that to some people, and certainly you want to consider, just like any other person. Okay, just like any other living person. Some people go with encouragement. Some people go with just repeating next to them. Some people go with just encouraging them to say La ilaha illallah, maybe just repeating that in front of them and saying La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Maybe, they'll feel that they're reminded to actually say that. So it depends on the person. So where is that basically coming from? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana akhiru kalamihi la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah." Whoever had his last words are, "There's no deity but Allah," will enter paradise. That's the whole idea. And that's why before you even go to sleep, make sure you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah as your last words, because those may be guaranteeing you to Jannah. Now, it is the sunnah to direct the dying person towards the Qibla. Okay, so what does that look like? We're talking about the face, we're talking about the body, if you're capable of doing that. Some areas it might be hard depending on the place that the person is in, if it's going to be hard, or perhaps they're telling you that they have to have certain certain things that are hooked onto the dead person, maybe just different things, that the hospital maybe considers that as, as a must to have, etc. by law, then that's obligatory. There is something called do not resuscitate. Let me talk a little bit about this. What does that mean? So, when a person's heart is not functioning, okay, there is to resuscitate or not resuscitate. What does that mean? So if a person is dying, okay, you can have a will. They'll make you at the hospital basically sign certain papers. What does that mean? So if the doctors are saying, well, yes, this person is dying, should the medical team intervene to try to work your heart? Meaning, what does that mean? They're going to use these electrical shocks to basically put it over your heart in order to try and attempt to make it function again. Okay. And should we use machinery to make you breathe and to probably breathe on your behalf, etc., or probably the dialysis machine on all of that when the person is dying or not? Okay. So this is always, a question that people would come to me. The do not resuscitate or to resuscitate basically means, are you saying, no, keep doing those electrical shocks to try to get my heart to function back again, no matter how many times you do it. But here's one thing. When they do these electrical things on the person's heart, the doctors will actually look at the heart and will tell you whether this is working in getting the heart back to pumping. And they'll look at the numbers and tell you, of course, there is a possibility of breaking bone ribs, the ribs in on that person, and it happens a lot. People's ribs basically break, etc. But here's one thing: when we look at, okay, I will do my best. The doctors will tell you we're code blue, whatever it is, we're gonna try and basically use these electrical things to get the heart back to working. But at one point, they're going to tell you that even if we do that, all we're doing is really just breaking more and more bones. There's no hope. The heart is failing. And in that situation, the family will just give that that consent to stop, basically do not resuscitate, to stop, and that's it. The medical doctors are basically telling you that the heart is failing, and just punching those shocks does not necessarily bring the heart back, because it's just going down the hill and it's not coming back. Okay, so you do not have to continue doing that. But if we basically know that this person is dying, do we have to resuscitate is the question. Okay, different opinions between scholars. Just keep that one in mind. Different opinions between scholars. And can the person actually say, well, I know I'm dying and I would like to say, do not resuscitate. It is what it is. What does that mean? Let's say a person is stage 4 cancer, okay? And this person already knows the prognosis is through, let's say, 2 months or whatever, and that they will be getting at one point, let's say, strokes, and these strokes, making their life basically harder and harder, and that this is a possibility. And when you're looking at these strokes, of course, the first thing that they might be doing is, yes, probably, check in different ways to probably blood thinners, etc., make these things. But another thing that they will be doing is basically resuscitating. But then this person decided, well, you know what, I'm just going to sign the document, do not resuscitate, because I already know the prognosis is only 2 months, and that a stroke is inevitable. That's going to happen anyways. And therefore, I would choose to do not resuscitate. And you know what? I'm going to be dying. I'm going to be dying. And instead of making, probably the process, just prolonging the process of dying and making do not resuscitate, and probably just becoming a vegetable after that, and then the machines, and costing my family all that money, I would just choose do not resuscitate, and it is what it is. Is that permissible? That's permissible. Is it also permissible for me to say, you know what, no, I feel that that's more like suicide, and I would choose to resuscitate, and as long as they're capable, and I let my family decide if what the doctors are then saying, if it's possible for me, even if it's moments, maybe I'll remember dhikr, maybe I'll remember this, and I would choose to ask them to resuscitate and not DNR, or do not resuscitate. And I'll choose that, no, I would like them to resuscitate, meaning to actually put in these electrical things, or, have a machine breathe on my behalf and all of that. Then, I'm just letting you know those differences of opinions. I know it's extremely hard on the family, but many might actually confuse and think that that's actually asking for a suicide. I'm saying that's not asking for a suicide, because seeking treatment in itself is not obligatory. Okay, seeking treatment is not obligatory. It's basically something that certainly I think we have to be more open with our loved ones to ask them what their wishes are. Would you want us to resuscitate? What does that mean? And who would you want to be responsible and basically take over in determining what what the doctors or what your wishes are and what the Islamic way, and somebody to basically assign a person within the family. I had a couple times where it was assigned to me and I would be making basically the decision. It was not easy at all, by the way, not easy at all, because many times some family members will be afraid to make those decisions and feel that, okay, did I just make a fatwa that this person can die? And that's why, they had chosen to just pass it on to me, because they were afraid that they just made a fatwa to commit euthanasia. This isn't necessarily euthanasia. Just to note that this isn't necessarily euthanasia, depending on the situation. Okay, if the person is dying, if the person is at that moment just living on machines, in other words, the machine is breathing on their behalf, the machine is basically doing, whether it's the, everything, dialysis, the breathing and everything on their behalf. Okay, and this person is basically considered brain dead. Then in that situation, to choose to stop the machines and basically and because the person had reached a state of brain dead. So clinically, they'll tell you there is no life in that brain, or at least some parts are functioning, but that person, even if they were to let's say come back to life, even if they were to come back to life, they're just going to be living as a vegetable. In other words, they're really considered as not capable of doing anything, just basically right there clinically dead. So in that situation, that's not euthanasia to just say, what, if this person is right now considered as clinically dead, then in that situation, it's not euthanasia to just face reality and just let them basically rest in peace. Now, but that's not a fatwa that anybody could just give like that. We will have to take that report, okay, and send it to basically the Majlis al-Fatwa, basically the Committee of Fatwa, and then the Committee of Fatwa will look into the doctor's report and then say their final word. But we would need, before making that fatwa, we would need two doctors to basically witness that yes, this person is living on these machines, is clinically dead. This is the MRI that we had done. This is these are the tests that we had run, etc. And therefore, we would get these two doctors' reports and basically make the final fatwa on that. Now, of course, facing the Qibla, reading Surah Yasin on the dying person, not on the dead person, on the dying person. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Iqra'u Yasina ala mawtakum." Read Surah Yasin on the people that are dying, not a person that is already dead. Because if the person is already dead, the scholars actually had differences of opinions. Just a note. Is it permissible? Let's say a dead person is in front of me, okay? Or let's say we're going to the grave. Should we go read Quran on the grave? Should we read Quran on this dying person? Believe it or not, there are differences of opinions between scholars whether this Quran that we would be reading, whether there's such a thing as gifting the reward for the deceased person. Okay. The first opinion regarded that no, this is not a sunnah, and this was not done by the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore, the Prophet ﷺ said, if the son of Adam dies, then their deeds are basically ended except by three things. Number one, sadaqah jariyah, basically a donation that you would be giving that is ongoing. So let's say I donate to maybe maybe a hospital, an orphanage, that's an ongoing sadaqah. Number two is waladun salihun yad'u lahu. So waladun salihun yad'u lahu basically is this exclusive to a person's offspring that they're making dua for them? Is this exclusive to making literally a dua, or is this including reading Quran on their behalf? Okay. So that number three is ilmun yantafi' bihi nas, or ilmun yuntafa'u bihi, just ilm or knowledge that they would leave behind, books that they had written and people are benefiting from whatever they had written, or perhaps maybe lectures that they had left behind, people are listening to them and benefiting from them. Then that situation, that would be something that would basically give reward to, and would be passed on to the dead person even though they were actually deceased. Now, having that being said, the debate between scholars is this including good deeds that others would do on their behalf, whether it's Hajj or whether it's probably reading Quran on their behalf? Can I read Quran and say, Ya Allah, this Quran that I'm reading, give the rewards to my mother? Okay. The first opinion said, no, you cannot, because it's not included in the hadith that we just mentioned. The second opinion said, yes, you can. Why? Well, they said it because the woman that came to the Prophet ﷺ said, my mother made an oath to make Hajj and she had died. Can I make Hajj on her behalf? And the Prophet ﷺ said, if your mother had a debt to owe, would you be responsible to pay it back? And she said, yes. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Daynullahi ahaqqu an yuqda. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's debt is prior and was more important to pay to the dead than a person or a human being's debt. Okay. So that was the first one. The second one, they said, well, the Prophet ﷺ said, Man mata wa alayhi sawm, whoever dies and they had fasting to pay back, then sama anhu waliyu. Then the person to basically fast on their behalf is basically the person that is their guardian. They would be praying on their behalf. Okay. So here's the thing. The scholars actually debated, like I said, can we actually do based on the analogy of these two hadiths, and therefore I can read Quran on behalf of that person that died, and therefore the reward would pass on to them, or not? For the Malikis, they regarded that that's not a bid'ah, and that you can actually read Quran on their behalf, and that it's not exclusive to their own children. Meaning, let's say you wanted to read on behalf of your friend, even though you're not their child, and they considered that, yes, it doesn't have to be exclusive to their child, but it could also include a friend, it could include a classmate or whatever it is, and it can include those people that are attending the funeral to read Quran, basically to read Quran, and instead of just sitting down, they're just, each one is taking a juz'u and probably reading a juz'u on behalf of that dead person. So that's, that area. So the first opinion considered that that's an innovation, a bid'ah, since this isn't making a dua on the behalf of the dead person, and considered that the Prophet ﷺ said, Iqra'u yasina ala mawtakum, on the people that are dying, and not necessarily the person that was already dead. Okay. So the first group of scholars, they said that that was an innovation. The second group of scholars, they said it's not an innovation, because that would be included based on the analogy of the other hadiths, and therefore it would be permissible to read it. And even if we are to assume that the reward wouldn't necessarily go to them, that would not necessarily mean that they would not be included in the reward. Okay, so does that mean including reading Quran, maybe al-Fatiha on graves? The sunnah when going to visit graves is to basically say, Assalamu alaikum dara qawmin mu'minin, antum as-sabiquna wa nahnu inshallah bikum lahiqun. Peace and blessings be upon you, the house of the believers. You had preceded us to death, and we will be following you to death. أنتم السابقون ونحن إن شاء الله بكم لاحقون. يا الله اللهم اغفر لنا ولهم وارحمنا وارحمهم ولا تفتنا بعدهم ولا تحرمنا أجرهم. Ya Allah, forgive us and forgive them. Ya Allah, do not get us into trials after their death, and do not dismiss us from getting the reward after their death, in other words, to visit the grave. Okay, now when the person is dying, let's say, well, the person basically, the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, إن الروح إذا قبض تبعه البصر فلا تقولوا إلا خيرا فإن الملائكة يؤمنون على ما تقولون. The Prophet ﷺ had basically said in the hadith, he said, when the soul is taken away, the sight follows it. So do not pray for anything but good in the presence of a dying person, for the angels say Amen to what you say. What does that mean? Well, that basically was talking about, remember when we said that the soul leaves the body from downwards upwards? What do we mean downwards? From the feet to the knees, to basically the abdomen, to basically departing the body. But the person himself that is dying, they will still have glimpse of soul, and they will look at their soul as it departs their body, which is why the dying person would be looking upwards, looking at their soul as it's departing. Why would they be looking at their soul? Because number one, while the person is dying, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Qaf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. Now your sight is strong as iron. Okay, is the word hadid to mean strong as iron? Is this a metaphor? Or is this literally talking about something that is quite strong and that there's something that is related to iron? Anyhow, majority of scholars actually consider that that's talking metaphorically, that the sight would be very strong and even stronger than what the living people are seeing. In other words, this person is now seeing angels. Are they 5 angels? Are they 6? Are they 7? Are they 9? Etc. I basically had read different reports in the different let's call it Islamic literature in general, on the number of different malaika that are present. And I've heard different things that dying people would be saying. They might say there are 6 people. They would usually come in the forms of people, by the way. They'll say 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, 8 people. And, sometimes they'll even count and tell you there are 4 people around me. Or they'll even be talking to people. And I've basically heard them saying, well, yes, they're telling me that they're going to take me somewhere nice. They're going to take me to somewhere scary. They're going to take me to this, depending on, the person, what they had actually done. Okay. They'll be talking to different things that you cannot say. Medically, they'll tell you this person is hallucinating. Okay. Because what they define hallucination as, they'll consider that hallucination is speaking to things, or speaking to basically about things that are not realistic around them, or basically not reality. Okay, but of course they're going to be calling it hallucinations. They're going to be calling it hallucinations because to a materialistic person, they'll consider that the existence or the presence of malaika is nothing but a myth. Okay, that it's nothing but a myth, and therefore this is not reality. Okay, but for a believer, we do not consider malaika as myths. or legendary things, but we will consider that the Prophet ﷺ had told us about malaika, that the Prophet had told us about the presence of malaika, that the Quran told us about the presence of malaika, and the shayateen, jinn, etc. All these things are actually present. Now, do the malaika come in the form of human beings or actual malaika? There is a point when the dead person will all of the sudden, it becomes this sudden moment that this person, even though they were dying at one point, they were, dozing off at one point, but at one point you see that they just suddenly woke up, and all of a sudden they're just looking around and opening their eyes, whether it's out of fear or out of comfort, but you could definitely see that they're looking around and all of a sudden moving their head and actually looking at things. That's when the malaika are present. The malaika are not, yes, they're present, but the person doesn't see them until at one point. Okay, so that point that you would see that this dying person all of a sudden, as if they just came back to life, and all of a sudden they're just looking around, that's when they're seeing the malaika. You're then sometimes talking to them, what's going on, what are you seeing, things, and sometimes they're responding, but sometimes they're not responding, and they're just too busy in shock to what they're seeing, because all of a sudden it's like you're talking to this person, but they're definitely living right now in a recognition of a different world right now. Sometimes they will respond to you and say, they're here, they're talking to me, they're telling me this, they're promising me this, oh, they just showed me this, it's a beautiful place, or it's an ugly place, or whatever it is. Sometimes they will be talking to you, depends on the stage. Okay, let's see. It is the sunnah to cover once the person is dead. Okay, once the person they just passed away, to actually one, close their eyes, lift their jaw. Sometimes their jaw is open, got loose, there's no life in it. So the sunnah is to lift up the jaw and not to leave it open and hanging there. So sometimes it won't close unless you really wrap it, kind of like tie it, maybe like a hijab or a scarf or something, or a gauze, and just tie it up with the rest of the head to kind of just leave it lifted up, just to give the most or let's say the best presentation for that person, closing the eyelids, lifting up the jaw, and putting the person in a state like they are praying. So don't let the legs spread apart or maybe bent. No, you're going to let the legs basically, as if they are standing for prayer. The arms, the hands, don't let them open widely. No, put them in a position of prayer at that moment. Even though, yes, when they are shrouding, when they're going to be shrouding and washing them, they're going to loosen the limbs again, but you want to make sure that every hour, or every let's say 20 minutes or half an hour, you're just loosening those limbs again, just a little bit, not too hard. Okay, just loosening it a little bit to make it easy for the washing and the shrouding process, and that way they won't harden that way. The most important thing, if you're afraid to do it, that's okay. The most important thing I want you to do is get those legs straight. Okay, get those legs straight. They don't have to be, completely straight where you're getting those, feet completely straight together. No, just getting those legs straight in a standing position, and the hands not spread apart, but basically in a salah position, whether on the sides or whether the right hand over the left hand, kind of like what you would do in salah. And closing the eyelids, lifting up the jaw. That's the most important thing you want to do at that moment. So, of course, covering the dead person. So covering the dead person just to give them, of course, respect and honor. Covering the dead person, maybe with a cloth, just covering the dead person. And certainly in the US, you do have to actually call 911, just making sure that they write basically their report on that, and certainly doing, what is necessary, because you don't want that dying person. You can do, the salam, especially if they had already received the note, of course, that this person is dying, and that they chose to not be in palliative care, or probably in hospice care. They chose to probably be in the home. They can actually do that. They can be in the home, but you just need to keep in mind that if this person is dying and they're in hospice, they're considered in hospice care at the moment. It is important to just recognize that there's going to be some responsibility, whether it's in handling the deceased person, whether it's talking about medications, what to give. And most of these medications, in fact, none of these, if this person is in hospice care, none of these medications are to treat the person. They're just more of pain management. Pain management. Some medications are actually to prevent seizures, because the seizures might actually be very strong in the person, because of the strong, of course, twitches that the body is doing, that they might actually fall off the bed. And basically, not the best thing to view when you have a dying person. So keeping that is all those handrails basically risen while the person is dying is important, because they can go through moments of seizures. This is not necessarily a sign of a bad ending. This is just the body basically doing its own process of dying. This isn't a sign of bad ending whatsoever. Okay, you can be a scholar and the body basically going through a course of maybe throwing up, or maybe having seizures, etc., and they'll give you certain medications to avoid seizures, and this isn't necessarily to make seizures or to make the person die faster. Some people are afraid of these medications, and they'll think that, oh, it's basically hospice making you kill the person faster, because they don't want to pay for insurance and all of that. Not necessarily. It's to avoid seizures. It's to avoid basically more pain and prolonging the pain. So they'll give them morphine. They'll probably give them certain painkillers, etc. You do not have to give them those medications, by the way. Do you have to give them these painkillers? They can choose to decline. If they don't want to take these painkillers, they don't have to. Okay. And they can probably write the will. So before they are at a point where they cannot they can actually make that will at one point to actually say, well, if this happens, this is what I want done. This is what I want the procedure to look like. That's okay. But it doesn't always go as planned. Okay, it doesn't always go as planned. Most of the times the family, and especially women, sorry ladies, and especially women, sometimes they, I guess, go into a mode of panic. And because I guess they're getting too emotional, and they just feel that no, this can't happen, and they're just getting too emotional as their loved ones are basically passing. And that's when certainly we have to make sure that we prepare them to just say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, to prepare them to be strong, meaning to not let their emotions get carried away with anger, with sorrow, with different impulsive behavior, to just maintain and just recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will give them mercy, will forgive them, and that this is basically a reality of life, that there's nothing that you could do. It's not your fault. It's no one's fault. Khalas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, qada wa qadar. And if it is somebody's fault, okay, if it is somebody's fault, well, that's not to discuss it now. Okay, this is not the moment to discuss it. Maybe down the road, we might need to perhaps see what the autopsy results are saying, etc. And maybe down the road we'll discuss this. But right now, let's work with the dying person in what we need to figure out right now, and not necessarily talk about whose fault it is right now. If there is someone's fault, basically, or responsibility, that's probably later to discuss. Right now, let's work with this. Okay. Is it permissible to do an autopsy? Okay. What is the whole idea? Let me just explain autopsy. Autopsy, they definitely, in order to do the autopsy, there's usually going to be let's say, an issue of question. Did this person die basically as a result of an illness, and in other words, a normal death, or was there a possibility of someone being responsible? In other words, it was an induced death. That's when they will basically order for an autopsy, just to make sure that there was no induced death. Okay, so the autopsy is permissible, okay, in situations where there is a possibility of someone being responsible for that person's death. But let me just explain to you what is going to happen in the autopsy. In the autopsy, they simply open up the body, literally open up the body, specifically the abdomen. First, they will look at the body, the whole thing of probably different signs of maybe strokes, maybe torture, maybe drugs, maybe suffocation, whatever it is. And they'll basically have to first observe the body from the outside, and then they'll observe the body on the inside, and actually examine the body on the inside to see the reason behind this death. Okay, there is nothing wrong. Certainly, we don't want to rush for an autopsy. Certainly, we're supposed to avoid al-muthla, which is deforming the body. But in the situation, or in cases where this death might be a result of possibly a certain crime, then in that situation, to give this person their right, in other words, to make sure that justice is also doing its course and going through making sure that justice does take place, is only possible if, for example, we have an autopsy report that examines the body and says, yet this person is actually considered dead due to an induced death, whether someone injected something, someone stabbed, killed, etc. Or even sometimes, let's say a car accident happens, okay? You just think that the car accident happened and therefore the person died as a result of the car accident. But it could actually be different than what you had thought. This person got into a heart attack, and then this person was not able to control their car because they had a heart attack, and this car basically hit the other car. Okay, then in that situation, we may not know all the details. So an autopsy comes in to give us this examiner's report and tell us that no, this person actually went into a heart attack, and therefore the other person that we might have probably wrongly accused of being responsible for the car crash and killing this person, the examiner's report will actually tell us, well, actually this person had a heart attack before even the car accident happening. So this is where, it definitely does make a difference, whether on auto insurance, whether on holding the other person responsible for probably homicide or who knows what it is, all these different things, murder. So these things actually may be necessary. So, I saw a lot of times Muslim families panic when they were told that they were required to do an autopsy. But I would say don't panic, because sometimes this is actually necessary in order to bring them justice, or probably bring someone else justice, by the way. Because if we are saying there is a possibility of homicide, we need to make sure that this person was actually put to death in an induced killing. And the other person might actually be innocent, and yeah, perhaps they were present there. Just because they are present, that doesn't make them the person that killed this person. That's where investigation, autopsy reports are needed, and don't necessarily just object thinking that this is against their religion. Okay. Certainly, to prepare the shroud, and certainly the washing the dead is definitely the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا ينبغي لجيفة مسلم أن تحبس بين ظهراني أهله. The Prophet ﷺ said, the corpse of a Muslim should not remain withheld among his family without being buried. Okay, certainly the body starts decomposing. So certainly the people's life and the people's health is definitely the alive people, and their health becomes prior to the deceased person. And we definitely need to rush burial, and need to rush shrouding and washing that dead person. And certainly making sure, in the US, after the person is dead, they won't leave them there, but they'll actually take them to an area to make sure that, of course, it's going to be like a fridge, basically a huge fridge, and that's when they'll keep on there. Of course, just to let you know, like a funeral home type of thing, they'll put them in a funeral home. The funeral home will not actually give you the body until another area takes the body to, basically, which is licensed. Okay, so they won't give you the body. I remember there was even a baby. Well, it was more of an embryo. Okay, it was a 5-month pregnancy that was miscarried. Okay, 5 months, it was really small. I mean, really, really small. It was probably the size of, I would say, just a half of your palm, literally half of your palm. Okay, and the hospital said, in order to wash and shroud that, basically that baby, okay, first of all, they won't give you that baby, so you cannot take it and probably just bury it in your backyard. That's against the law. Okay, but they'll put it in like a casket, and the hospital will give it to the funeral home. The funeral home would have somebody accompany you. Okay, they put this baby in this little tiny box, which is like a casket, and then I washed and shrouded this basically baby, which is really the size of half of my palm. I washed and shrouded that. And this person that is responsible for the funeral home was standing right at the top of my head. I mean, watching everything, making sure that not a single glance is away from him, and he's watching everything. Okay, then of course, placing this baby inside this box and then taking it to the masjid. And this person from the funeral home was with us and did not even allow that we would put this box in our car, and it has to be in his car. Okay, and then take it to the masjid, prayed Salat al-Janazah there. The man was actually present all along, from stage A to B to C, until finally even the burial, to finally make sure that it was buried right before his eyes, and that he could just make the report that yes, it was buried, this is what we did, and this is what I had done, etc. And finally, okay, in the Muslim countries, it's not that complex. Okay, but in places like the US, at least in Minnesota by law, even if it's a small baby, even if it's a small fetus, a miscarriage, they will not give you any moment to basically deal with the dead in any way. Even if you're talking about the funeral home, it's basically done in a certain in certain ways. It's basically under cameras, under a number of different procedures, that they will make sure that it's a process that is done with very specific regulations, let's say it this way. So for the Muslim funeral homes, or at least the areas that are considered for janazah, it does cost money to prepare those areas, almost $3,000, believe it or not. So to sanitize that area after the washing and the shroud, they have a special sanitation, special chemical things that they basically have to clean that area every single time. So just to avoid any types of contamination, any types of, basically, of course, because you're talking about a person that was dead, their body is starting to decompose. So certainly you have to make sure that this does not pass on any illnesses later on. Okay, so that's the same thing. We're talking about putting it in the fridge, in a certain fridge that is for the dead, and certainly that's to give also slowing the process of to slow the process of decomposing until it basically gets into the burial. Okay, it is permissible to wait until perhaps someone that is important to this dead person, maybe, yes, this person is, let's say, traveling from this or that state or this or that country, and we're just going to wait. They just want to say goodbyes to them or whatever. This is actually permissible to wait, but not for too long. So if we're talking about wait a day or 2 days, we can do that, but on a condition that this does not harm the decomposing process. So if we're talking about a couple days, and of course that's going to be decomposing the body. Now, one thing is that some people might actually choose to, one, donate their body. We'll talk about that piece of it. And two, donate their body for, let's say, science, or perhaps maybe they might actually choose that they would be buried, let's say, in their home country. Okay, let me just explain one thing. For the person that made the will to get buried in their home country, to travel and take that body, basically, let's say, over on a plane, basically take them to their home country, before they would do that, they would have to empty and do some embalmment. Okay, what that means, that embalmment basically means emptying the body from their blood. It literally, they would insert They would insert like a needle, and maybe I could actually show you a video. They would literally insert, maybe I could show you some video of what really happens. Okay, this is the funeral home, and I'm gonna just mute this and just explain some things. Okay, the funeral homes, man, I absolutely hate the smell. But anyhow, absolutely hate the smell. So this is what a funeral home would basically look like. Okay, and certainly the funeral homes, this is what they use. Okay, this is exactly what it would look like. And certainly this bed would actually be tilted in a way, because right at this bed right here, let me show you right there, at the end, that there's actually it's like, consider this as a big sink. Okay, this is a big sink, and they would have basically a hose. This is the hose of water that they would actually wash, but they would do an embalmment. This embalmment would mean they would get basically, here we go. This is it. You saw that thing? Okay, let me make it faster. Okay, I'm going to show you right there. This is it. They would basically use this machine to literally empty the body from the blood that it has. So they literally just insert this needle, empty the body with it from the blood, and then basically in order to travel. So embalmment doesn't include emptying the body from all the different organs, but if it needs to travel by law, if you need to take this on a plane, they would have to empty it from all the different organs. So they would open the body, cut open the body, and literally remove all the organs and bury that, or throw it away, and then basically sew it back. Okay? This is important for whoever wants to make a will, that they want to be buried, that this is what they're going to do. Now, here's where this is contradicting with the religion. This is contradicting, this is contradicting with the religion, because Islamically, you're supposed to treat the body with dignity. What does it mean to treat it with dignity? To treat it with dignity actually means to keep it in the shape that it's in, without harming it, without deforming the body in any way. That's what it means to give it dignity. And this is definitely deforming the body. That's Islamically haram. Okay, unless there was a necessity. Is the necessity to apply the will for that person that they wanted to be buried elsewhere? Is this for that necessity permissible or not? Differences of opinions between scholars. Just to note that one, differences of opinions between scholars. Sometimes people would rush to just make any will because they think it's special, but what is actually special and is to actually apply the sunnah. That's the most important thing, is to apply the sunnah. Okay, I just want you to kind of see, just embalmment and how that basically happens. Of course, I used these funeral homes, and they're definitely a lot better prepared than Muslim funeral homes, to be honest, because they're designed to actually make that. Even the area for washing and shrouding and all of that, it's all prepared just for that. Certainly, we're not going to be using any of their chemicals, because they will be using these chemicals for embalmment, which basically means to empty the veins from the blood, and they would use these very, very dangerous chemicals inside basically the body to give it at least a life, a life image as much as they can. And they'll basically put makeup on it and basically put in these chemicals in the veins, in the body, to give a good appearance for that dead person. But of course, for a Muslim, this is all haram to use. Okay, this is all of these chemicals are haram to use, and certainly, but using things, if we had, I remember washing a baby that was almost 7-8 months. Okay, so it was a bigger baby. Okay, but of course they did an autopsy for that baby, so I had to sew up the body. Okay, and certainly to sew up the body and all of that, it's, and especially if it's a baby, if you're a woman, of course, to sew up the body is not the good feeling, but you have to basically learn how to do all of that. And just the whole idea of putting needles inside a dead body. Sometimes if it had been there for a couple days, the body and the skin might start to rip up in your hands. So you want to avoid, if you're already seeing that it's starting to rip up and it's not working so well, you're just going to do tayammum at that moment. If the body is starting to already rip up, or perhaps maybe by putting water, that body is starting to rip up in that situation, then you're just going to do tayammum. The exact way that you would do tayammum on a living person. You're going to basically hit right there against sand, soil, or rocks, and then wipe the face, and then wipe the hands. That's basically it. If, let's say, the body was totally decomposed, and it was, they'll basically have it in this bag, but this bag, if the body is totally decomposed after coming from the autopsy, they'll basically kind of think of it as double and triple bagging that, especially if it was decomposed for, I know we had a body that was lying in water in the river for 5 days, and it was totally decomposed because when it's in the water, it basically decomposes almost 50 times faster than in air. So the body was decomposed as if it was lying there for, think of it, if it's 5 days, we're talking about as if it's been lying in water, that is, as if it was there for almost 7 months or 10 months, because with water decomposes a lot faster. So they had to package the autopsy, they had to package it almost in couple packages. Okay, but still the smell was too strong. And the person that was the main person that was responsible for washing that body, she basically called me up and she said, I'm really afraid to even open it up. I had never seen something that decomposed. Can I just just not do that washing and shrouding? And I said, all you need to do is just, over all these bags, just do tayammum, and that's it. Over all these bags, yes, over all these bags, and you don't even have to wash and shroud unless you had the guts to do it. But she said, it's so strong, the smell is too strong that I just feel I'm going to pass out. And that can happen. You just feel that you're just going to pass out. The strong smell of that deceased body is too strong, and that you just feel like you're going to pass out. So in that situation, your life is definitely a lot more important to us than this person's life. Certainly, of course, I'm not going to look into, I'm just going to just show you, some things, because we came to the question of, okay, well, what do we do when a person wants to have the will to be buried elsewhere? Just wanted to show you that piece of it. But what's more important is basically the Muslim way of washing and shrouding the dead. So I'm going to talk about that later on, inshallah. It is 11:52. What we'll do, inshallah, I'll answer the questions right now, and the day after tomorrow, will continue the washing and shrouding. I know it's a process, and hopefully the day after tomorrow, hopefully, inshallah, it'll be our last class, and we'll be watching a couple of videos to make things easy. Trust me, it's going to be extremely easy, but I had to actually get on to discussing certain topics that are important. Let's see. The sister saying, reading on their behalf, meaning, is it permissible? This is a considerable opinion. So yes, some scholars, especially the Maliki, did consider that it is permissible to read on their behalf. All the other scholars considered it a bid'ah, and therefore you cannot read on their behalf, and it would never get to them. For the Malikis, they considered that no, you can read on their behalf, and certainly whether it is your son or the person's offspring, or whether it's a relative or a friend, they consider that it is permissible to read on their behalf. Is it permissible for the accused to make a statement while the child or person is in the hospital before death or one day after the burial of the deceased? Is this? No. The statement that is basically the will, that is done before the person is dying. So what does that mean? To make the will, okay, to make the will, it has to be before the major illness that the person is dying. Okay, so what does that look like? That looks like when the person is fully sane. Okay, they have their complete sanity, they're completely aware of what they're saying. But if the person is unaware of what they're saying, then that's a different story. Now, it's important to keep in mind that in the US, for example, if the person is making a will, okay, that you might need some legal let's say specialists to actually come in to write the will, and they'll have their moment with the deceased with the person that is dying, to make sure that they're aware of what they're saying, that they're completely not under any force, not under any stress, etc. And well, they are under stress, but at least not under coercion to make this statement and to make this will. So they'll have their moment with them. So just make sure that in situations where, of course, this person is dying, and certainly, you want to ensure that the government and also the bank probably is not seizing the property, not seizing probably the ownership of all that money, etc. You want to make sure. That you do the right things legally and not lose your ownership. So you want to make sure that you have professional legal professionals basically help you do this. The sister is saying the statement was basically that she, paternal aunt, is not responsible. She knows very well, so she will not seek forgiveness from you, father, brother, or anybody. Then she says, I pray the child lives a healthy body, but the situation is very serious, it's very difficult. So in case of he lives no longer, his father can take revenge, qisas, but she will not accept any forgiveness from him, but she didn't do anything wrong. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, Khasatullah. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. So you can probably explain it further. Would embalming also hurt the person? Asking while thinking of this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, breaking the bone of a deceased is like breaking it while he is alive. So two things. When we are saying that embalmment, or whether we're speaking about maybe autopsy, okay, thinking of autopsy, does that actually hurt the person? Does that mean physically hurt the person, or does that mean hurting them, meaning that this is dishonoring them? Two different opinions between scholars. Some scholars said that it literally hurts the person. And they said, well, the Prophet ﷺ said, breaking it alive is like breaking it while the person is dead, then therefore literally that way. Other scholars said that this is not physically, not literally, but this is metaphorically dishonoring them. This is showing that just as you have to honor the person and not break their bones and not disfigure their body while they're alive, that's the same way that you have to treat this dead person with dignity. Okay. And certainly when we're speaking about this opinion that they had said, disfiguring the body, that this is to dishonor the body, they considered that no, this isn't talking about embalmment being painful or removing the organs being painful per se, but this is actually talking about dishonoring. Okay, that's an opinion, and it's a considerable opinion, by the way. And I would consider that as the preponderant because of a number of different reasons. Remember Asma bint Abi Bakr when she had said, when her brother, her son, not her brother, but her son came to her and he said, I had dreamt that they were going to basically disfigure my body. And she said, what harm does it do? Does it affect if we were to slice up the goat after it was dead? What harm does it do to it after it was basically dead? That's it. So in other words, she was giving the inference that once the body is dead, it doesn't feel anything. Okay, not feeling anything. Why? Because there's no ruh in it. There's no soul. Therefore, all the different nerves that basically send messages and the different messages to the brain are not there anymore. So the body is not feeling the pain, but it's an issue of giving honor to the deceased. So that's the thing. But at the same time, we would consider that whether removing the organs or whether autopsy or whether embalmment, all of that is only to be done in cases of necessity. And that's that point of, well, how do we understand the necessity? Is it a necessity to fulfill the will to be buried in a different country and remove all the organs and even the blood and all of that? Is that a necessity or not? Differences of opinions between scholars. Okay, any other questions? You can unmute yourselves if you would like. Sorry for the sister that asked the question. I wasn't able to understand the question about paternal aunt not being responsible. I completely did not understand that question, dear. There's a context. If the father and mother, she said, and grandma of a child accused maternal aunt for a serious condition the child was in. So she goes there, that is the hospital, and says this statement. Okay, now that makes sense. You want to go on the microphone, dear, because I am having trouble understanding. You don't want to? That's okay. You can ask me, inshallah, on microphone, on WhatsApp, and hopefully I'll answer that question. If there's anyone that would like to ask any questions, if there's anybody that would like to ask any questions and unmute themselves, that's okay too. So, inshallah, go ahead, Naveed.
I just wanted to ask, in the Pakistani culture, when we go over for condolences, we all together sit and do Fatiha. Is that okay?
So, like I said, the first group of scholars considered that that's a bid'ah, and considered that the first group of scholars, specifically Hanbali, they regarded that joining in that way and in being there in these groups, they considered that that's a form of reminding the person and reminding the person of the deceased, and that's ma'tam and all of that, and consider that that's a bid'ah. The second group of scholars, they said, well, even if this Quranic recitation does not go to the dead, okay, that the person is just remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that al-akhirah, and that they're sitting down, whether it's reading a whether it's reading a juz'ah of Quran, or whether it's just their own time, instead of just, side talking and all of that, they're just taking a Quran to read and using that moment to do a remembrance of that. That was the second group of scholars. They considered that's permissible and not necessarily a bid'ah, and considered it a good bid'ah. I know that for some people, they might say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean a good bid'ah? There's no such thing. That was actually a term that Ibn Abd Salam had introduced. And he said a good bid'ah would be something that has a basis in the religion. Has a basis in the religion, meaning just like when we're talking about Salat al-Tarawih, that's basically a good bid'ah. The Prophet ﷺ had done that before. The Prophet ﷺ, there is a sunnah where the Prophet ﷺ had practiced something like this. So did the Prophet ﷺ actually practice reading Quran in a group of people for the deceased? That was never really practiced like that, but just reading Quran on its own is actually permissible. So what if I'm here just trying to show support for the person, but instead of side talking, I'm just taking a copy of the Quran, but just really showing my presence of showing care to that person. Is that permissible? So the second group of scholars, they said it is permissible. And even if we are not necessarily saying the reward is passed on to the deceased, but at least showing respect to the family of the deceased. Now, the other thing is that to prepare meals, that's a key thing that many times people ask about. The Prophet ﷺ had said, "Isna'u li ala Ja'far ta'ama." Make food for al-Ja'far. Who's al-Ja'far, and what is the story there? So what is the story there? The story is basically in the situation where someone's loved one dies. Many times we would say that, the family is getting these people coming in, and they would feel burdened that they would have to put food for these people and make them feel company. The sunnah is to actually bring food to the family that lost the loved one, not the other way around. That's the sunnah, is to make food for the family that lost their loved one, and not make them make you food. That's the sunnah. Because if they're already trying to process the death of their loved one, and now they're busy actually worrying about making you feel company, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. But you're supposed to be there making, whether it's making them food, maybe cleaning their house, maybe giving them emotional support, maybe perhaps reminding them of their loved one and what good things that they had presented, all of that, or maybe needing to make the necessary adjustments after the loss of their loved one. That's what you're supposed to be doing, and not making the family basically busy to support you and making you feel company. That's not the sunnah. Okay, I hope I answered multiple questions.
Yeah.
Did I answer that one, Naveed?
Yes, Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
وإياكم. So this is it. Inshallah, we'll see you the day after tomorrow. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll be continuing the washing and shrouding, inshallah. So for now, we'll say subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa